I recently spoke to Mr. Gene Corbett. Now, Gene is a very passionate man. He's passionate about safer driving, particularly for younger people. He runs a business called Total Driver, and hopefully we'll hear a lot more from Gene on Road Ramblings in coming months. But let's have a listen to what Gene's got to say about current practices in training young drivers. Hello, Gene. How are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
Very, very well. Now, you've got a different concept of road safety to the set in cement situation that stands now in most governments. Before we go into all that sort of thing, I thought what we might do is actually talk about you, and you can just tell us where you're coming from, your credentials, your CV, and it is very impressive.
Oh, I've been around a couple of days. Yeah, that's true. It kind of started out as every young boy's fantasy. I just got swept up into the right circle of people at the right time, and next thing you know, I wound up with Mercedes-Benz as part of their F1 program in 2003, teaching people all about driving. So it was quite the journey.
And I think you worked with Red Bull as well, haven't you?
Yeah, we did some work for 888 Racing back in the day when they were Better Electrical. We built the ride car for them. We called it the Better Boss, and you could do hot laps with Craig Lowndes and Jamie Whincup. We did a world's first launch for Land Rover with their Discovery 3 and Range Rover Sport that encompassed an off-road component, a back-to-back competitor comparison, and believe it or not, hot laps with V8 supercar drivers at the same time. So, we've had some interesting experiences in the industry.
And, of course, you've done a fair bit of instructing on teaching people, and your passion is obviously getting young people to learn to drive in the right fashion.
Oh, I think everybody that's in the industry has a passion for the fact that there needs to be better drivers, that we don't have to, and we shouldn't be accepting what we see on the road every day. It's intriguing every time everyone goes for a drive. They criticise the people they share the road with, but not once do we stop to think, what are people thinking about our driving? So what I found when I was travelling with all the different brands and doing all the different programs was we would always end up complaining about people at the end of the day with the same sort of statements, that somebody should do something about it. And what I worked out was it had nothing to do with culture, it had nothing to do with legislation, it had nothing to do with licensing. There was a human dynamic that was common to every person that came through that we had to focus on. And I was very fortunate to work under a guy who spent 5 years working with NASA on a research project between them and the US Navy and the Ford Motor Co. And out of that came all sorts of fascinating research about attention and adrenaline, mind maps, embodied cognitive skills, postural stability, and so forth. So we started to apply it as a process in terms of how we prepare young kids. And it's quite an intriguing industry in the sense that it's very cottage-based. We've worked out how to franchise making something as simple as coffee and donuts, and we still can't define what driver training is and how we prepare our kids so they don't crash cars on the road. And what we found when we started to apply that same methodology to these young drivers, a dramatic shift in their driving behaviour and a dramatic change in their driving outcomes that meant that they suddenly weren't a risk category at all. They were very pleasurable to sit behind. They made great decisions. They were fantastic. So the intriguing part that I learned out of it was everyone bandies around behaviour, and we're very quick to say it's the kid's fault and they're not concentrating hard enough and they're not applying themselves enough and there's too many distractions and so forth. But what we learned out of all the research was that driver behaviour was actually a symptom of our decision-making process. And what they call embodied cognitive skills, our natural process of making threats or decisions based on threats and hazard information, is for one environment, our natural environment, which is to walk and run. And the moment you put them behind the wheel of a car, you introduce speed, and our brain can't process speed. So everything that it did to make decisions in our normal environment that kept them safe is now what creates and compounds the risk as a driver. And the more pressure you put them under, more expectation you put them under, the more you create a negative outcome, not a positive outcome, because of what's going on inside their head. So that's what our program's actually about, is retraining what they call embodied cognitive skills.
Now, Gene, I think you infer really in your correspondence and things you've told me is that you're very much opposed to the way things are done now, how people are trained to drive now. And I think you covered that a little bit in what you were just saying. Your business, Total Driver, does it turn all that around and turn it on its ear, how people are trained in driving? You said the hours driving, the tests, you've got problems with all of those issues, haven't you?
Oh, look, there's a famous saying, practice is fine. First, you must know what to practice. And in this industry, we do it the exact opposite way. Instead of reaching for the pinnacle and finding the best to prepare our young kids. We actually do the opposite. We look back into the past and we find the most inexperienced and unqualified trainers and suddenly put a hat on them and say, you're now qualified. If you tried doing what they do in this pre-license industry and this graduated licensing scheme, if you did that in any workplace in the country, you would be shut down. In fact, there's a court case going on up in the Northern Territory at present where one government department is suing another government department because they didn't facilitate the correct form of training that resulted in a fatality accident, and they're being sued for not undertaking the correct form of training. So what we find is the industry standard in every form of employment, training and education is completely turned upside down and thrown out the window, and that's considered acceptable for how we prepare our kids as drivers. And then we wonder why we've got all these negative results, such as a 3,000% increase in their accident rate post-license compared to pre-license. So what those sort of statistics are really showing us is the approach and the emphasis of our training is clearly misplaced to the outcome that we're expecting them to achieve as a driver. So it's not the kids failing us, it's us failing them.
Gene, are you able to tell us in a nutshell how you think it should be done, the right procedure?
If you go back to what I was saying about how we naturally process information, what the research has shown, or the evidence in the research on our approach has shown, is that you need to introduce some very key skills at very selected points in their learning process. So what we did, we built a training program. And then within that training program, where each step was very clearly defined, we gave a free mentoring program to the parents to teach the parents how to prepare the students along the same lines. And what we're doing is creating a controlled, proactive process instead of an uncontrolled, reactive process, which is what we naturally have. Now, what we've found is if you follow the process, it works consistently every time. And we've reduced their accident rate by well in excess of 75%. So a 25% reduction would save New South Wales $1 billion a year if you put it in some monetary terms. The other thing we found was the moment you pulled one piece of the puzzle out of the process, then you might as well not do anything, which is what we're seeing happening on our roads every day. So you just can't get mum or dad who have got no experience or training or education, where their background in driving was literally, and I've got to say the best story I've ever heard so far was a person that went for their test. He's now a dentist in Toowoomba, of all things. And the policeman, as he came walking out to take him for the drive, somebody went speeding down the main straight. So the policeman hopped in the car and said, if you want to pass your license, you've got to catch that person. And that was his driving test. So we're taking people with no background in experience, no background in driving, no background in a formal process to understand what driver training actually is. And we're throwing them into the supervisor role where they're suddenly expected to have access to an enormous amount of resource that they don't have and train their kids. And that's fundamentally where the flaw is lying. So the short answer to what you're saying is if you want to change the driver behaviour, then you have to put in a good driver coach, and you have to have a system that's evidence-based that everyone follows through to change that, what we call the embodied cognitive skills, how they're naturally processing their threats and hazard information. If you do that, the evidence shows a very clear change from reactive skills, which is what causes the crash, to proactive, which is where they're actively removing themselves from the threats before they evolve into an accident.
Gene, if people want to learn more from what you're saying and are very interested in what you're saying, and it is really sensible, common sense sort of stuff, can they access your website or your Facebook page?
Yeah, if they go to our website, which is www.totaldriver.com.au, there's all sorts of information there. They can send us an email to info@totaldriver.com.au and we can answer any questions. There's a whole host of information on our Facebook page as well that they can get access into. We're in a national drive at present where we're expanding the business, so we're looking for people who are passionate about creating change and would like to be instructors. Very big change in how we prepare our staff. The industry standard's a 4-day course in how to run a small business. Ours is a 3-month intensive training program and then another 3-month transition in the field. And we offer the schools in all the areas 3 free programs to help us focus on the attitudinal, the emotional, and the psychological development of them as a peer group. So any inquiries, if they send them through to our website or give us a phone call on 1300 887 352, we can answer any inquiries.